John Henry told his captain, man ain't nothing but a man. For a leg they still go down. I will die with this hammer in my hand. I will die with this hammer in my hand.
You may recognize that tune as the folk song of John Henry, the story of a steel-driving man who raced a machine and won, but only to die with a hammer in his hands. To most folks, that's just a tall tale, but many historians believe that there's a kernel of truth in there somewhere. That a real John Henry did race a steam drill and win, but only to die. For decades, that story has been tied to West Virginia's Big Bend Tunnel. But what if I told you that there's another location that's more likely to have happened in? You see, I've come to Birmingham, Leeds specifically, to see where John Henry really did race a steam drill, right here at Coosa Tunnel. No one knows when the work songs of John Henry first rang out, but we do know they were first recorded in 1909, when a North Carolina collector, Louis Bascom, caught two haunting lines. Johnny Henry was a hardworking man. He died with the hammer in his hand. Work songs like this were rhythmic chants sung by laborers, often freed black workers or conscripted convicts, to face grueling tasks like driving steel into rock for railroad tunnels. By 1913, historians found that the Southern rail crews belted out tales of John Henry, a steel driver who challenged a steam drill to bore through a mountain. In the song, he's a giant, sometimes from Tennessee, sometimes from Virginia, wielding a 9 or 20-pound hammer, racing the machine to prove man over metal. John Henry wins, but he dies in the task, leaving his girl, Polly-Ann, or sometimes called Julie-Ann, left grieving. Texts vary wildly. He's on the C&O line, or the C&W, sometimes on the Georgia Southern. His hammer's weight shifts from 12 pounds to 20 pounds to a 50-pound hammer, as his story bends from song to song. Scholars like Guy Johnson and Louise Chappelle traced it to the Big Bend Tunnel in West Virginia, and they hunted eyewitnesses in the 20s and 30s. Some of the eyewitnesses claimed they saw the race firsthand, yet others claim that it never happened. No records record John Henry's name in the Big Bend Tunnel, yet the song's stubborn grip on tradition hints that he was, in fact, a real man. And that hint is pulling me south to the tall stone of central Alabama. Birmingham roared to life in 1871, built on railroads, steel, and sweat in central Alabama's iron heart. This was a blue-collar crucible where ex-slaves and laborers were drawn to back-breaking work at ironworks and railroad companies, a perfect stage for John Henry, the steel-driving man. Casey Gamble from the Vulcan Parks and Museum knows the story of Birmingham well.
Because this city is not near a major river or ocean, the railroads are what really connected us and our industry to other cities and other states. So we, traditionally, water transportation is the most common with major cities. So because we don't have that, we kind of had to make our own river, if you will. That's what I tell my kiddos on field trips, and that's where the railroad comes in. And so the city of Birmingham was actually built right on the right near the cross of two major railroads. So we know Birmingham was founded pretty much, just a few years after the Civil War, right? So Birmingham was founded in 1871, just a little bit after the war ends. And, anybody who has studied Reconstruction knows this was there was a lot happening There was a lot happening. It was also like the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, or one of the Industrial Revolutions, if you want to get technical. And, there was a lot of enthusiasm for people not from here to come here, start businesses, utilizing the natural resources here, utilizing the vast workforce that did exist around the state. And then, of course, we know that lots and lots of formerly enslaved people are now free and, migrating to cities to get away from that kind of rural life that they had been forced to live.
In 1887, the Columbus and Western Railroad blasted through central Alabama, carving the Oak and Coosa tunnels along the way. Oak's 1,200 feet and Coosa tunnel's half-mile of solid granite took steel-driving grit to get through. And I'm meeting with local historian Bill Norton to dive further into this story. How you doing?
Good. Glad you came over.
So, what is it that you actually do?
I am a retired engineer and I write books, and most recently I've written a book about the history of Donovan Valley, which includes these tunnels.
So what is these tunnels?
These tunnels are on what was originally the Columbus and Western Railroad. They were built in 1887 to 1888. The idea of that railroad was to connect Birmingham with Columbus, Georgia. But then the railroad went through a number of transformations, mergers, etc. It was owned by Central and Western for a while, and finally it ended up being Norfolk Southern, which it is today. So these tunnels have been in continuous operation since about 1887.
And this tunnel is the Coosa Tunnel, right?
This is called the Coosa Tunnel. The mountain behind it is actually Double Oak Mountain, nowadays anyway, but originally it was called Coosa Mountain because right beyond it, 20 miles or so, is the Coosa River. So this was called the Coosa Tunnel. The other tunnel and the other ridgeline, being Oak Mountain, was called the Leeds Tunnel, or sometimes is referred to as the Little Tunnel. Because of the two, it's the smaller one.
All right, and then these were the two tunnels that you believe that John Henry competed in the race in and worked on in 1887.
Yes. The race, best way I can tell from some information from a University of Georgia professor, Dr. Garst, is that it occurred at the other tunnel, at the Little Tunnel or the Leeds Tunnel. And you can see the rock around us. To get to the tunnel face proper, they had to dig a big entryway through rock. And the process at that time to dig this sort of entryway and also the tunnels themselves was to take a steel rod, say 10 foot long, and you drove it into the rock. You beat it with a hammer. And at a depth of 10 feet or so, I'm not real clear on how deep, then they would pack that with dynamite and blast it apart. So there became a trade known as a steel driver. And he was the guy, he was a big muscular guy that would drive the steel into the rock. And then he had an assistant that would occasionally take the drill out and spin it to get the debris out. And he was called the shaker. So you had a steel driver and a shaker.
Johnson and Chappell investigated the tall tales of John Henry independently during the 1920s, and both came to the same conclusion, that John Henry was real and did race a steam drill, where he met his end at Big Bend Tunnel. During their investigation, they found that nearly all black men at the time knew the name of John Henry and believed he was a real man. Some of the stories about John Henry claimed that he was a larger-than-life man, as if he was a black Paul Bunyan. Others had Henry as a criminal bad guy who was later killed by the law. The latter story being one that was likely mixed up with a man by the name of John Hardy, a steel driver from the Big Bend Tunnel who was later hanged for murder. In fact, many academics of the time mixed up John Hardy and John Henry, claiming that they were the same man from Big Bend Tunnel. But as Johnson noted, the song never made such a mix-up. But despite Johnson and Chappell both agreeing that it was most likely Big Bend Tunnel where John Henry died, there has never been any documents to back it up, nor any record of a race happening in the tunnel despite the well-documented nature of the project. In fact, there is no evidence of a steam drill ever having worked at Big Bend Tunnel. Modern historian Scott Reynolds on this subject traced it to the Lewis Tunnel in nearby Virginia, where there are accounts of steam drills being worked on the C&O line. But this is where the Alabama theory steps in, arguing that Central Alabama's got the stronger case, using evidence that Johnson, Chappell, and Nelson all neglected. 3 letters that Johnson received in 1929 shift the trail to Central Alabama. C.C. Spencer wrote to Johnson claiming that he saw John Henry beat a steam drill in 1882 at the Cruzy Mountain Tunnel, really the Coosa Mountain, 2 miles south of Oak Mountain, near Birmingham's Red Mountain. But Spencer noted that his recollection could be failing him, as he listed the wrong year for the tunnel being built. F.P. Baker said that he watched John Henry out-drill a machine at Kersey Mountain, another name for Coosa, right by Red Mountain, tying it to the same spot. Glendora Cummings backed it up, placing him at Oak Tunnel in 1887, dying after the race. All 3 pegged the job to contractors Shea and Dabner, or Shea and Dabney. That's Frederick Yeamans Dabney, the Columbus and Western chief engineer, listed in Birmingham's 1888 records. Together, these point to 1887, when the Columbus and Western drilled the Coosa and Oak tunnels near Birmingham.
John Henry was the steel driver, according to the legend, and he would have been working. He was the story that I'm following is that he was a former slave from Copiah County, Mississippi, and he was following his former master was a fellow named Dabney, who was the chief engineer for the C&W Railroad, and he was following him as part of the work crew. And he gained quite a reputation because of his skill at driving these steel rods into the rock. It sounds mindless, but there's a lot of just flat out strength, but a lot of skill as far as how you turn the drill. You know, like most anything that looks simple, it's not. There was a little art to it, and he was quite good at it. He had a reputation all along the rail line for how good he was at drilling steel through rock.
What is the story here in Leeds? So there's a lot of rumors in Leeds that John Henry took place here. There's a lot of locals who will tell stories about their great-grandparent or some other person had met John Henry in the late 1800s. What are these stories?
Well, the person that I know probably the best, her name is Edna Hornsby. She was the granddaughter of the Hollidays. The Holliday family lived here in Donovan, the community of Donovan, which was a little town at one time. She says her grandfather knew John Henry. And even though they were a couple of decades apart, he actually knew of him. But this would have been back in the 1870s. I haven't really tried to work out the years, but that was her story, and it's, you know, a firsthand story. Then you've got a friend here who also says that his grandfather knew of the story and has a different variation to it.
Central Alabama's case is strong. 3 letters from the 1920s point to Oak and Coosa tunnels, built in 1887 by the Columbus and Western. C.C. Spencer, F.P. Baker, and Glendora Cummings all saw a John Henry race a steam drill here, under the contractor of Frederick Yeamans Dabney, who is said to be the former slave owner of John Henry Dabney. Local stories back this legend, naming this ex-slave who must have been born around the 1850s and freed from the war, still working for his ex-master. But the smoking gun, a pay stub, a death record, is still out there, waiting to seal the deal.
Well, if we could find a railroad record, would be great, that lists a work crew in this area of Alabama, and it had the names Fred Dabney and John Henry Dabney. That would be awesome.
John Henry's story hits hard. A man who stood against a machine, his hammer echoing in Alabama's iron heart. And it means much to the people of Alabama to keep this story alive.
I think it would be both a very cool thing for that legend and that hardworking man to be associated with Birmingham or with Alabama, but at the same time it speaks to the very hard and tough environment that many of the workers here in Birmingham and around the Southeast were dealing with, during this time.
Yeah, everybody likes something to claim, and having that story, if we could demonstrate by certain facts that it was here, that would be a great plum in this valley, this beautiful valley called Dunmont Valley, for the Shelby County as well as for the state of Alabama. I just think as a story, no matter where it happened, there's something really noble about human work, you know, human effort, human craftsmanship, human skill, as opposed to a machine, which is a derivative of man. We create our machines, but once you create the machine, it kind of loses its human qualities, you know. But if you have a man who's with his passion and his effort, his determination, accomplishes something, there's something really noble about that, and something praiseworthy, you know, if you will. And so I would like to see this story confirmed, and I just think it means a lot in the history of man to know that man can beat machine, and it's just very noble quality there.
But in the end, whether the story of John Henry took place in Alabama or in Virginia, or even happened at all, this story still rings true for thousands of railroad workers throughout the 19th century. And that is a song worth singing.
John Henry told his captain, when you go to town, bring me back a 9-pound hammer, more dry steel on down. Come on, dry steel on down. When Johnny was a little baby boy, sitting down playing in the sand, two long tall women come riding by, singing, John Henry gonna be my man. Singing, John Henry gonna be